Welcome to my BreadTube channel. My name's Carter.
Over the past 5 years
We have socialism in the US and it sucks. Oh no.
doing this series, one thing I hope that I've made abundantly transparent is my utter disdain for socialism and central planning.
Brother, there is something wrong with this picture. I don't know if this dumbass realizes that Stalin fought against Hitler. I don't know if this dumbass realizes that this man murked this motherfucker.
Clear and
Is this a new
detailed across
weirdo?
my many criticisms of the ideology. But at the core of everything, the problem is simply that collective ownership over the means of production just doesn't work. The whole concept misunderstands and outright rejects reality to such a fundamental degree that it consistently creates.
Stalin killed more people, but he wasn't racist. Jared. Hey, Jared. Source? I need a source on that. How about that? Listen, I'm not like a Stalinist, but I'm gonna need a source, okay? I need a conclusive source on that, by the way. Because if you say Holodomor, you're a fucking idiot. Because Holodomor, by the vast majority of scholars, has been debunked. Because the Holodomor was a direct result of capitalism. Meaning that it wasn't the USSR government, it was private kulaks burning fields in a year that was already incredibly low harvest. Okay? Unfortunately for you, Stalin never starved anybody. He did kill a lot of people. He did. He killed a lot of capitalists. A shitload of capitalists. Okay? He killed anybody who had proven harmful to the people of the USSR. He did. He was paranoid. I talk about it all the time. He killed probably innocent people. They probably did, right? But you put it on the same level as the Nazis? Are you fucking high? Are you actually dumb? Who do you think killed the Nazis because he thought what they were doing was unjust? Stalin, bro. Because he thought that the vast capitalist expansion of fucking Nazi Germany was horrible. Yeah, he was super paranoid. Yeah, listen, there's a reason that you can look to Stalin as a younger Stalin in his we'll call him his glory days, as like one of probably the best leaders, right? And then he falled off and took an L, right? Post World War II, he started to 9 years after. Wait, did Jared leave? The Nazis are worse if you ask most historians, but the counts for Stalin are insanely huge, like 10 million, right? I'm not even remotely trying to defend that shit. God help me, why did I type this? Then don't hit enter. Why do you think the death counts are so high for Stalin and communism has killed 100 million people? Because they count anytime anybody starved. Pretend like people don't starve. Bro, 10 million people starve under the capitalist system that we currently have. Hitler worse, 100%. Yeah, but there shouldn't even be a comparison. Like, I would argue George Bush was worse than Stalin. Bro, Barack Obama was worse than Stalin. All right, I learned something new today. An Indian guy started the Mexican Communist Party. I'm going to start a Communist Party in the U.S. Hell yeah, brother. Except for you can't. That's actually illegal. That's the only thing that is actually illegal in America politically is to start a Communist Party. You can start a Nazi party, though. Fun fact. You can start a Nazi party, but you cannot start a Communist Party. You can't call it a Nazi party because they think Nazi equals communist, right? It doesn't, right? But you can start like a alt-right or like a anti-Semitic party. Yeah, that's why a lot of communists will call themselves unionist, right?
Poverty, misery, and pain for wherever it's implemented. We've seen this play out all over the world.
Okay.
Cuba, Venezuela, China, the
Venezuela.
USSR, East Germany, Cambodia, North Korea.
Wait, did you just say, huh?
Even places that we often don't even think about anymore, like Somalia and Zimbabwe,
You don't think about, dog. Guess who does think about that? Socialists.
were decimated by socialist policies. Those countries would have been better off with no government at all than they were with a government that controls natural resources, dictates what people are allowed to produce, sell, or buy, and sets prices for goods and services across their economies.
Wait.
The evidence of socialist failures is overwhelming, and it's really not that difficult to understand the causal relationship. And yet, somehow, millions of people around the world still think it's a good idea. Why? Well, perhaps one reason is because they just aren't particularly connected to the victims. After all, they're on the
Bro, you know what I am connected to? The victims of capitalism. That's fucking crazy. That's fucking nuts, isn't it? Also, like, listen to how many fucking people from like the previous, like the former USSR that wish the USSR came back, right? Like most people former USSR, yeah, they might have some like terrible social issues, but they still believe like the government can be so much better for the people.
other side of the world. They mostly don't speak English. They're probably dirty capitalists anyway, right? Besides, a lot of the worst abuses happened a long time ago. But what if I told you that there are large areas of the United States right now, today, which feature all the hallmarks of socialism? The people who live in these areas are subject to complete top-down control over education, healthcare, resource.
Oh, bro, try not to. It's about to get racist. Oh, shit's about to get racist. Shit's about to get racist, chat. Oh, here we go. No, socialism is not when capitalism. Socialism is when Native American.
Management, business licensing,
we're about to get a little old school racism.
All of it directly managed by U.S. government agencies. Immigration in and out of these areas is also restricted, and it's even difficult for outsiders to do business in these parts of the country. Predictably, sadly, the result of socialism in these pockets of the United States is the same as it has been literally everywhere else in the world. Poverty, suffering, despair, death. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm talking about Indian reservations. Realistic portrayals of American Indian life in popular culture are sometimes few and far between, but we're starting to see more and more content that depicts the realities of living on a reservation. But what most of these portrayals still don't tell you is how and why those realities came to be, and almost none even hint at effective solutions. So stick around and join me for something I've wanted to talk about for a very long time on this episode of Out of Frame.
Okay.
Let me say a few things up front. Yes, for the most part, I'm going to be using the term American Indian, or just Indian, and not Native American.
Okay, well, why? Why?
If you have questions about
the point, okay, oh man. This is a thing. No, it's not racist. It's not. There is already film festivals in America ran by Native Americans that call themselves Indian. That's fine. That's literally fine. That's okay, right? But as a person who is not Native, right? You should use, if you're gonna say Indian, you should say American Indian, right? Obviously. And if you really don't know, you should just say Native American, because what difference does it make? You don't need to say why. I think it just depends on where you're from in the country. But the fact that he's like putting it in a video for everyone, bro, you should just probably use the most proper language. Otherwise, you come off as a dick, right?
Why, CGP Grey did a pretty good video about it that I'll link in the description. The short version is, that's the term used for legally recognized tribes in the United States. Another thing you should know before we really get into this is that while I will be challenging some common misconceptions, it is absolutely true that what the United States government has done and continues to do to American Indian people is horrific and unjustifiable. It's true that native populations were most likely declining.
Do you think that could maybe have an effect on this socialism that you say?
Before Europeans arrived. But the introduction of new diseases and increased conflict led to a massive decrease in their numbers between the 1600s and the early 20th century. The full history is bloody, cruel, and too long to be properly accounted for. But the highlights include enslavement, slaughter, re-education, forcible relocation, occasional forced sterilization, and denial of any semblance of autonomy, some of which continues to this day in spite of what you might have been taught in school. Of course, the contentious history between native tribes and the federal government goes back further, but for our purposes today, we'll start with the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This is the legislation that granted the president authority to set aside lands west of the Mississippi River for Indian resettlement in exchange for their traditional tribal lands within existing state borders. It's the start of what we now think of as reservations. The remainder of the 19th century was marked by the Western expansion of the United States.
This guy's not a lib chat. This guy's like a fucking fascist or some shit. My man tried to say Hitler was a communist, okay? He tried to compare Hitler and Stalin. The moment you do that, you're a conservative or ANCAP or some shit.
Relocation of American Indians and escalating violence on all sides. Eventually, some of the land reserved for relocated Indians was even taken back by the federal government.
A fascist is like somebody who looks to it's the end goal of conservatism, right? It is someone who is looking to hyper conserve government, and usually results in like massive amounts of people dying. One group benefits while everyone else falls to the side, right? So in the idea of Nazi Germany, it was the Aryans, or the white people, or anybody who wasn't Jewish would prosper, or straight, right? In Italy, it was like Italians, native Italians who would prosper, and everyone else was killed or cast to the side. And it usually relies on slavery. Like, the best way to say it is slavery. You enslave the people who aren't into your rigid definition. Yeah, Franco in Spain. I mean, in America, we were fascist for some extent, right? A form of fascism. So American fascism, like socialism, there's different flavors, right? There's different flavors of socialism. There's different flavors of fascism, but they rely on some core tenets. Hypernationalism is probably the most unifying factor amongst fascists.
And made available to American settlers instead. Indian religions were banned. Indian children were taken from their tribes to be civilized at government-run boarding schools, the same way Aboriginal people in Australia were treated until the 1970s. Yep. If those children returned, and we've been discovering that that's a big if, they no longer spoke their native tribal languages, knew their people's history, or believed in their tribe's religions. In the great libertarian activist and Ogallala Lakota tribesman Russell Means, in the government schools, which are referred to as public schools, Indian policy has been instituted there, and it's a policy where they discourage critical thinking and the creation of ideas. And yet, in spite of all this re-education, American Indians weren't even granted full U.S. citizenship until 1924. Tribal landholdings were in decline as well, from 130 million acres in 1884 down to just 40 million in 1934. Now, you'd think that as a lot of those atrocities became more widely known and as more Americans started to actually care, things would have gotten better. But the main thing that happened was that the way our society viewed indigenous people started to diverge. Some folks held on to the traditional racist image of Indians as genetically inferior savages who needed to be civilized. But the progressive intelligentsia of the early 20th century started to develop a new and different perspective, which added a veneer of science to that same racist idea, reimagining American Indians as noble savages.
Noble savages. This is a little bit of history revisionism here. That was long before the eugenics movement. The noble savage thing actually started like the moment we came west. Noble savages came the moment we came west in the 1800s, like probably 1820. That is a term that was around for a long fucking time.
Tragic casualties of history to be mythological.
This is a little bit of history revisionism to pretend like this shit started in the eugenics movement.
Apologized and saved by self-appointed do-gooders. And throughout the 1900s, the prevailing political attitude toward American Indians was that the government had the duty and obligation to take care of the tribes and their members. You see, according to the progressives, American Indians had been irrevocably broken by the oppression they faced throughout the centuries. And as per usual, they thought that bigger, more intrusive government was the answer. Now, to be clear, while the progressive viewpoint might seem to be kinder on the surface than that of the more obvious racist who believed that Indians
What is my guy showing? What is this B-roll, by the way? Anyone else seeing this B-roll?
Were somehow innately inferior, their conclusions were fundamentally the same. Native people simply couldn't handle freedom. If they were smarter, more psychologically resilient, harder workers, less prone to crime, less susceptible to alcoholism, or whatever other racist trope you want to trot out, they would be fine. But whether it was due to genetics or history
that's a bad
and
thing.
socialization,
Okay, we agree.
both the arrogant progressives and the old school bigots believed that American Indians were just not cut out.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? The American progressives? What would you call the people who fought for native rights? Not progressive? Conservatives? This is the dumbest shit I've ever heard, bro. He's just using the word progressive to point to the worst people.
Out to make decisions.
Anybody who did anything bad, that's a progressive.
For themselves. And of course, the only solution either group has ever been able to come up with is to have the government get more involved, policing crime, managing their economies, and
this was done by Democrats, bro.
Re-educating Indian
Old
children.
Democrats, by the way.
But that's always been true. The federal government, specifically the Bureau of Indian Affairs, has been handling education, infrastructure, healthcare, food distribution, licensing, regulation, and even law enforcement on Indian reservations for as long as they've existed. The result? A poverty rate of 25.4%, hours-long drives to the grocery store, assuming you're not...
Wait. Racial wealth Snapchat Native Americans. United States has too often hindered Native American advancement. Wait. What the fuck is this? What, brother?
25.4%.
This is like the most disingenuous graph, because I guarantee this is like not per capita, right? Because of course you're going to have more white people in poverty in America because that's the majority.
Hours-long drives to the grocery store, assuming you're not getting commodity foods from a food distribution program. Either way, this usually means being stuck with processed, shelf-stable foods that won't spoil on the way home, which isn't particularly healthy.
Bro, are you fucking stupid? An hour drive isn't a month-long carriage ride. What are you talking about? Bro, I grew up an hour from the store. Our pantry, we didn't go buy shelf-stable food. We bought fucking normal people food. What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Unfortunately, unhealthy food generally leads to poor health outcomes. So it's no wonder that obesity, heart disease, and diabetes rates are much higher on reservations than in the rest of the country.
Do you not think that's because of other extrinsic factors? Like lack of education around food or lack of quality food?
This means a shorter life expectancy
Not
on the reservations
shelf-stable
than
shit?
anywhere else. But it also frequently takes hours for EMS to get to a medical emergency.
That's true.
So a lot of people die simply waiting for healthcare.
That's true. What is the fault of that? Maybe because when we instituted the reservations, we gave them a check instead of building infrastructure. I mean, it is the government's fault. Unironically, it's the American government's fault because instead of building infrastructure, you know what we did? We just fucking gave them a check. If you want proof that UBI doesn't work, by the way, look at reservations. UBI doesn't work because reservations don't, the UBI that they get from the federal government is not ever put into stuff like that. And this is changing, by the way. There's big initiatives to change this.
Indian health service clinics are overburdened, poorly run, and
give more autonomy. I mean, it is unironically because they can't choose what to do with their money a lot of the time.
To get to. Many homes on reservations don't have adequate access to necessary infrastructure. And I'm not talking about multi-gig, high-speed internet, although, of course, internet access is a problem too. I'm talking about the basics. Paved roads, electricity, running water. You guessed it, Indian Housing Authority, a division of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, recently determined that more than 500,000 American Indians have severe housing needs.
Okay, so that's not socialism then, right? Like, okay.
But the IHA's waitlist for better housing is
tell me this is socialism?
long, and the government's restrictions on development make it all but impossible for private alternatives.
Why do you think those restrictions exist, bro? Oh my God. Does he not think government restrictions could be a direct result of private housing companies looking to maintain their incentive, right? Because building on native lands is actually not as profitable for them because of the policies that are instituted there, or maybe the the requirements to build on native lands, probably some form of like, I don't know, they probably have like a certain allotment, right? Or like some weird tax shit, right? It's just something that they don't want to do because it's not profitable.
To emerge. Law enforcement is another problem area for reservations. Tribal police are empowered to deal with crime that is entirely contained within their tribes. That is, crimes committed against a tribal member by another tribal member. Once a crime begins to involve non-members, such as casino guests visiting a reservation, the FBI or state police have to be involved, even if the crime occurs on reservation land. Given that the circumstances for American Indians on reservations are so bleak, it's no real surprise that there's a higher incidence of the side effects of despair, like alcoholism and drug abuse. As far as
this is true. This is actually a true thing, and there is like a biological kind of thing for this. I don't know what it is, but like alcohol affects natives, or not natives in general, but like I think there's like there's a gene, right? It's like a gene. Not all natives have it, obviously. Like some white people obviously have it as well. Some people have it. Asian people can have it. It's like common, right? Yeah, it's like your breakdown of alcohol makes you more like you get drunk quicker, essentially. It's a gene that you can have. Like tons of white people have it as well. It's not a gene. No, it's not alcoholic gene. It's just you feel alcohol differently.
I'm concerned, virtually all of this can be traced back to the federal government's authoritarian control over Indian reservations.
Yeah, but dog, we don't live in socialism, so that's capitalism's fault. Our government is capitalistic.
And I bet you thought they were sovereign territory, right? That's certainly what I was taught in school, and I believed it for a long time, even though it's actually nonsense. This is a weirdly personal issue for me, not because I'm particularly connected to tribal people, but because of where I grew up in Nebraska, and because my dad, who has been an amateur collector of Native American art and a voracious student of their history and culture since I was a small child. Most of us learn a little bit about different societies.
Your dad was a white dude imposing his history, revisionist history on natives, right? Guarantee it. If you're saying this shit about native history, your dad was just making that shit up, dog.
In school. But strangely, very few Americans have any knowledge of our country's own indigenous tribal cultures.
I agree.
Whatsoever.
This is true, though.
I mean, I was taught about Greek and Roman mythology. I learned US and European history. We studied little bits about Mesoamerican culture, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, Russian culture. I grew up around a lot of German and Czechoslovakian immigrants, so I got a taste of their cultures growing up too. But in spite of living right in the middle of Lakota territory, almost everything I knew about the tribal people of Nebraska prior to college came from my dad. And also from reading books about important figures like Black Elk, Sitting Bull, and Red Cloud. Nebraska...
Yeah, but none of those books are political or explain the political dynamics. They just explain the dynamics of tribal. I've read 2 of those books, actually.
It has several large reservations. The Pawnee, Odo, Niobrara, Omaha, Ogallala, Sac and Fox, and Winnebago people all have a home in that state. I was fortunate enough as a kid to be able to experience some powwows and other American Indian cultural events firsthand. And again, thanks to my dad, I spent hours and hours listening to Native American mythology on audio tape. Admittedly, I had a pretty unique upbringing in that regard, but all that interaction with Native culture gave me a perspective that I think most people probably don't have. And you know what I learned? All the indigenous people who lived in the United States and every other part of the world before European colonists arrived were, and are, just people. They aren't all vicious warrior braves or magic shaman who have some kind of supernatural connection to nature. They weren't stupid, incapable of understanding commerce, or incompetent to engage in property exchanges with Europeans.
Those natives are people just like me, way too dank.
Kinds of exchanges happened among their own tribes for centuries, after all. And their history is just as filled with war and bloody conquest as anyone else's anywhere in the world. They were just groups of people trying to survive the harsh realities of nature, doing the best they could to develop technology, art, and industry. And many were pretty successful. But as has been true for every conquered group throughout history, they were just not as successful as the people who now inhabit their former territory. Sadly, until the 1990s and early 2000s, our school...
Bro, it was just a... Huh? Does he not understand disease? Just they got unlucky?
Books and virtually all the movies and TV shows you could find about American Indians just reinforced all those old tropes. Fortunately, with the success of films like Dances with Wolves and Smoke Signals and shows like Northern Exposure, some of that started to change. And now, I think we're entering a much more interesting time with content that treats American Indians and other indigenous people as, you know, human beings. We're finally beginning to get better glimpses of life on reservations in pop culture. The 2017 movie Wind River and 2018's breakout TV hit Yellowstone, both from writer-director Taylor Sheridan, are pretty good examples. Fair warning, spoilers for both titles are coming.
How does this have to do with socialism? I have no idea. Wait, I'm so confused. I don't is he saying that everything the government does is socialism? FBI, socialist. CIA, socialist. Bro, the Socialist Party of America is actually a 3-letter acronym, and it's known as the CIA. I don't know if you guys know about this. The CIA is socialist. The main argument for why reservations, by the way, are socialist is kind of what Grazi alluded to, but it's so much more than that the government does stuff. It's because reservations in America do face, or not face, but they are rewarded with, I don't know how else to describe it. It's like UBI, right? They also do get a benefit for when they go to college. If they choose to go, if Native Americans choose to go to college and they are from the reservation, they get like big benefits in going to college. Like there is some form of reparations had there for Native Americans. But they don't solve any of the issues, right? None of that, like we talked yesterday, UBI, shit like that, reparations in that form does not solve systemic issues. The way to solve systemic issues is to put industry there and to put like things you need, right? Logistics and shit like that, like to infrastructure. The regulations put on reservations, this is a federal government thing, or state regulations, is the reason you don't see industry moving to reservations. The reason you will see nothing, like you won't see Walmarts usually. The reason you won't see or not even Walmarts, but like factories, right? For example, usually the only thing you'll see on reservations is like farming stuff and like everything is locally owned, but there's no industry. Which is fine. Like I get like not having a Walmart or a chain thing, but I mean, there's like no factories. They don't produce any goods.
A lot of Taylor Sheridan's work is kind of depressing, but I really appreciate that it shows a part of America that most people never get to see. And it does it without resorting to simple stereotypes of either white Americans or American Indians. But okay, you get it. Life on reservations sucks.
Okay, Derek.
That was the whole video?
I can already hear the arguments that this isn't real socialism.
Okay.
He said it! He said it!
Except that it kind of is.
Wait, how?
Socialism is not merely all the things you think are good.
What?
Nor is it an imaginary state of Marxism that can never really exist.
You're right, that's communism. Okay.
Sorry, tankies. It is any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods.
Okay, let's see if you understand what that means.
And that's exactly what happens on Indian reservations. Huh? So yeah, it's a pretty good example of real-world socialism. But
no, it's not. Because our government isn't socialist. Socialism is a form of government. The government controlling reservations is capitalist.
No one can make decisions on behalf of other people better than those individuals can make for themselves. In the words of Ludwig von Mises, socialists and
every fucking time, bro. Every time. Fucking no, bro. Every time. Every time. Chat, why is it every single time? Every time that somebody's like, you just don't understand the economics. They just forget, bro. They just forget. Ludwig von Mises was an Austrian fascist whose dad was a Nazi. Oh, just quoted a Nazi. My bad, bro. Just not doing fascism right. Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. Very cool. Who is that? Okay, Ludwig von Mises with another dude started a thing called the Von Mises Institute post World War II. He was an Austrian fascist who believed that Hitler did fascism wrong and that he knew the true way to do fascism, and that fascism was the only righteous way to do things because some people are strong and understand economics. Okay. Also, sell your children. You should be able to sell your children. You know why? Free market, baby. You don't need kids. Sell children. We need a market of children. Okay?
The antithesis of free enterprise,
That's an awesome
private
jacket.
initiative, private ownership of the means of production, market economy, and the price system.
The antithesis of free enterprise, private initiative, private ownership. Oh, he's saying, yeah, okay.
Planning and capitalism are utterly incompatible.
Okay, that's a bad thing, right? Wait, you're owning yourself. Oh, no. Capitalism has hurt itself in confusion, right? How are you supposed to know what your people need? Who dictates it then?
Within a system of planning, production is conducted according to the government's orders.
Yeah, but who's the government? When the people own the government, who is the government? Oh, the fucking people, you dumbass. You fucking dumbass L nerd.
Not according to the plans of capitalists and entrepreneurs eager to profit by best filling the wants of the consumers. When we allow society via
What if you
the
don't have enough
state
money to be a consumer? Okay.
to control people's economic and cultural decisions, we end up with utter chaos.
That is true, Grazi.
And a rejection of individual
We live in a planned economy now, right? Planned to make people starve because there's like 5 food suppliers in America, right? That's planned. They plan how much they're going to produce. Our economy is run by like 7 companies, like almost entirely, or less than. There's probably 50 companies that run America, right? That's planned. They know how much they're going to make. They know how much like they're not going to sell. They know how much to throw away to keep profits up, right?
people's wants
That's
and
planned,
needs
just not
in
by the
favor
people.
of political whims. This is all bad enough without any racist brutality and intentional mistreatment. And of course, that's been a pretty common theme among socialist states too. The
what?
US government has treated the Indians like children forever. Even as
Wait,
far
you're saying we should do less to help them? Wait, is this my man unironically saying we should have not done reparations? Oh, no.
back as 1831, Chief Justice Marshall,
Oh,
in his
no.
ruling in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, called Indian tribes domestic dependent nations. He added that the tribe's relationship to the federal government was that of a ward to his guardian. Under this flimsy justification, the federal government essentially eliminated private property rights on Indian reservations. 75% of reservation land is in tribal trusts, though it's actually titled to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Another 20% is held in individual trusts, meaning an individual can own an interest in the land, but the title on that land is held by the BIA as well. This fake version of private ownership is further complicated by legally mandated fractionation. That is, when whoever owns an individual interest in a piece of land dies, inheritance has to be split equally among that person's heirs. As you could probably imagine, after a few generations of this kind of division, that land is essentially dead capital, since the law requires consent from a majority of the owners of a plot of land to do anything with it. In reality, only about 5% of reservation land is truly privately owned. So, I mean, when 95% of the land is owned by the state, when it's essentially impossible to access the resources on it or use it as collateral without majority approval, yeah, that's what collective ownership
What? Because the people that own the land, the natives, aren't allowed to make decisions. Do you realize what you just said? They aren't. It isn't democracy. They own the land but can't do anything because of the United States government being capitalistic. He's brain broken.
to do anything with it. In reality, only about 5% of reservation land is truly privately owned.
Okay.
So, I mean, when 95% of the land is owned by the state, when it's essentially impossible to access the resources on it or use it as collateral without majority approval, yeah, that's what collective ownership over property actually looks like. In other words, socialism. All the excuses in the world cannot change that fact, and it's happening right here in so-called capitalist America. It's shameful, and it needs to stop. As a group, American Indians have been horribly subjugated for hundreds of years, and they are now the only group in America who are forced to live under the exact kind of socialist central planning that impoverished people in the USSR and China and everywhere else those ideas have been implemented. I don't know about you, but I'd actually like to fix this problem. So maybe instead of focusing our attention on performative virtue signaling like land acknowledgement statements,
Virtue signaling.
renaming sports teams, or politically correct terminology, we should actually try to get the government out of the way for once.
You're
the
so
only
dumb.
real solution to any of this is individual
No.
freedom. People need to be allowed to make their own choices with resources that they actually control. And they need to be able to earn their successes and learn from their mistakes instead of being treated like children. American Indians aren't being given that opportunity. Their cultures, economies, and very lives are controlled by the US government. And that was just as true for their parents,
Does he have a
grandparents,
Twitter?
and great-grandparents going back hundreds of years. It's time for that horrible
How many subs does this
experiment
person
in
have?
authoritarian socialism to end.
Authoritarian socialism, you fucking dumbass. What an absolute fucking... Tell me you've never read any ounce of socialist theory. You've never read a single fucking page of any fucking Marxist, any Marxist ideas. Any, not one, you fucking dingus. Okay? Holy shit. Tell me you've not read one book in your fucking life.